Hello, Reddit. I need to get something off my chest about my recent solo trip to Yellowstone National Park. I'll tell you right now, it wasn't any picnic. So, there I was, all alone, having started my hike at the crack of dawn from the upper geyser basin. The early morning air was frigid, cutting through my layers like a knife as I followed the Firehole River towards Biscuit Basin. The serenity was deafening, the desolation suffocating. It wasn't the awe-inspiring, tranquil solo journey I'd imagined, but more like walking through an eerie ghost town with nature as its sole inhabitant. Even the wildlife seemed spooked that day. The birds seemed oddly silent, and the usual rustle of woodland critters was conspicuously absent. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was too early in the morning for them, but a nagging doubt was gnawing at my subconscious. I continued on my journey, trying to shake off the creeping dread that had sunk into my gut. The sight of Grand Prismatic Spring, with its surreal colors, usually would have lifted my spirits, but that day it felt ominous, like an alien landscape from a sci-fi flick. As I reached the vicinity of Biscuit Basin, an oppressive fog started to roll in, so thick that it felt like I was walking through a cloud. The visibility was next to nil, and that nagging feeling of anxiety had graduated to full-blown fear. I thought I should turn back, but a weird stubbornness, or perhaps foolish bravery, compelled me to keep moving. That's when I heard it. A low growl, so deep it seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath my feet. I froze, every survival instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. It was as though the whole of Yellowstone had held its breath. I won't sugarcoat it. I was terrified. Every hair on my body stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, a shadowy figure emerged from the fog. A bear? Maybe? Or maybe it was my imagination, fueled by fear in the foggy landscape. I didn't stick around to find out. Something primal in me kicked in, and I started running, bolting through the fog, tripping over tree roots and slipping on the wet rocks. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my car, panting and shaking like a leaf in a storm. Whatever was out there in that fog stayed with me long after I left Yellowstone. It's not a story I often share because, frankly, it scares the hell out of me. But I thought I'd put it out here. Just a reminder that nature is not always the serene, beautiful thing we imagine. It can be raw, wild, and sometimes downright terrifying. I like listening to your channel as a stress relief thing. I honestly never thought I'd be writing to say I had a crazy supernatural story too. I am not the kind of person this happens to. I don't go poking around in graveyards. I don't keep an eye out for aliens. I don't even go to haunted houses at Halloween. If you Google the word skeptic, I'm pretty sure my picture shows up in the definition. Or it did. Maybe now I'm not so sure. In my day-to-day life, I'm a certified public accountant. It's a stressful job, with a lot of time spent hunched over a desk or staring at a screen, so I usually try to go for long walks or hikes to get the kinks out. I live in Phoenix, so it's easy to get out of the metro area and into the wilderness. This particular day, late spring last year, I was giving myself the treat of a day hike in Two.Tonto Natural Bridge State Park. We'd just gotten through April and I was completely, ridiculously stressed out. It was one of those beautiful, clear days when you just need to be outside. Well, if you're me anyway. The sun was hot and bright, and the landscape looked like someone had put it through an Instagram filter. I'd started early in the day because I wanted to do the Gowan Trail hike all in one shot, and I stopped for a lunch break before noon. I just finished my water and checked the map to make sure I was still going on the right trail up the mountain. It's a rough hike. I'd been meaning to try and get to this particular hike for a few months, but hadn't ever been able to get the time. Probably wasn't a good time to do it because it was hot, but hey, I like a challenge. If I didn't, I'd never get through tax season. I headed out at an easy pace once I'd given myself a bit of a rest. I don't like hiking just after I eat. The scenery is worth walking slow too. It's like something out of a dream, with huge caves to walk through, crumbling red cliffs and pristine streams. It's easy to see why this is one of the best state parks in the state. Like I said, the hike isn't easy and sometimes it's slow going. The day I went, I didn't see a lot of people. I liked that, to be honest. I liked the idea that I had this park to myself. The workout and the solitude did what I hoped it would do, and I started to feel like I was finally decompressing after the horrors of tax season. I was taking another water break when I heard a bit of noise ahead of me. I thought, damn, I hope it's not a bunch of tourists. I know that's not very polite, but I really wasn't in the mood for company. I wanted to be alone and be able to enjoy how beautiful it was. I heard some scuffling and rustling about 30 feet ahead of me and froze. It occurred to me that tourists might not be the problem. It was summer, but that didn't mean some cougar or fox wasn't about to try to take my leg off for getting near a den or a set of wandering cubs. It could even have been a rattler. I really didn't want to meet one of those. The rustling got worse, and then, all of a sudden, a bundle of gray fur tumbled onto the trail ahead of me. I stood where I was, my mouth going as dry as the dust caking my hiking boots, and did my best not to breathe. Whatever it was, the gray-furred critter made a snarling little whine and dashed back into the bushes. I stayed still for at least 10 minutes, but I didn't see or hear anything anymore. So was it safe to keep going? Or should I go back? Maybe I should report the sighting. But I wasn't even sure what I saw, so I decided to wait and see if I could spot any clear tracks in the trail. If I took a picture of the tracks, the rangers would have an easier time identifying the animal. That seemed like a nice, neat idea, very practical, and that's what I went with. I was probably being stupid, if I'm honest, but I had my bear spray with me and my walking stick, and frankly, I'm a big guy. I figured it was a badger or a fox, and it wasn't going to be a problem if I kept going. I kept my eyes open as I kept going up the trail, but I didn't see or hear anything. My gamble was paying off. I'm not usually reckless, so this little bit of it felt pretty good. I was heading into the really rough part of the climb to the summit of the mountain when I heard clattering rocks. That's nothing new. It's a cliff face and rocks fall all the time. But because of what I'd seen before, I made sure to stop and take a look ahead to make sure the trail wasn't being blocked. The trail wasn't, but there was something on the mountain. No, two somethings. The animals had grayish fur. I couldn't tell how big they were at that distance, but I was estimating they were at least human-sized. Maybe. Like I said, it was hard to tell, but the fact that I could see some details even at this distance meant they weren't small. I froze and just watched them. They looked like they were communicating with each other, nosing at each other. Maybe they were hunting something, but maybe not. I didn't feel like there was a lot of urgency in what they were doing. The sensible part of me wanted to start backing up, but since the two critters and I assumed they were wolves, didn't seem to be paying attention to anything but each other, I stayed where I was. One of the wolves, I'm just going to call them wolves, pushed at the other and then took off up the trail at full tilt. The other one yelped and started running after him. I'm guessing it was a him, too. It reminded me of my dogs playing more than anything else. Maybe they were young wolves? That was it. They almost reminded me of teenagers daring each other to do something stupid. Whatever else they were competitive. They were running almost neck and neck up the slope, which was fine, I guess, as long as there was one. But that climb to the top turned into an actual, honest-to-goodness climb up a vertical cliff face, and last I checked, wolves weren't mountain goats. I pulled out my phone and tried to film it because, if nothing else, the rangers would find the behavior interesting. And that is where it got weird again. Zooming in meant I got to see the animals better. They weren't wolves. Well, not all the way wolves. Their heads were wolf-like, maybe dog-like. There was all that gray fur and a lot more of it starting to come in around their shoulders. But those were human-like legs pushing them up the mountain and five-fingered hands pulling them up the rocks. Clawed, five-fingered hands. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I could feel the blood pounding, but I couldn't move. It was just so surreal. But then my logic came back. There had to be an explanation. Was I watching a movie scene? Was someone filming here? Was some angry assistant producer going to pop out of the bushes and scream at me for ruining their location shoot? That had to be it, right? But nobody else was around and I couldn't see any cameras. I watched through my phone camera as the thing in the lead missed its footing and slipped. It started to take a tumble down the mountain. The other one stopped climbing and tried to stop the lead one from falling. But like I said, whatever they weren't mountain goats. The lead one ended up on top of the smaller one and they went skidding down the cliff face. I couldn't see where they landed, or if they landed in one piece. I put my phone down and I actually started to scramble to where I thought they might have landed, because if I was right and there was a film crew, I wanted to make sure everything was okay. The last thing I wanted to do was report to the rangers that there was an accident on set. But then rationality kicked in and I made myself take a look around. I didn't see or hear a film crew. Nothing but nature as far as the eye could see. If there was a pair of wounded animals out there, I wasn't qualified to help. If there was a pair of wounded, I don't know what to call them, things, creatures, cryptids, out there, I didn't want to help. What I wanted was to go home, in one piece. Getting back to the park entrance and the ranger station took an hour, and I argued with myself the whole time. Turn in my phone footage? Forget it ever happened? I mean, what had I really seen? And would telling the truth be way more trouble than forgetting about it? In the end, I erased my video, and I didn't tell anyone. It just seemed like the safest option. So, like I said, I don't have an explanation for what I saw. At least no rational explanation that makes sense. I just know I'm going to think twice about going back to the Tonto Natural Bridge Park, just in case whatever I saw that day remembers seeing me. I am posting this under a fake name and account so it can't be traced. I know that probably sounds paranoid, but I just want to make sure this needs to get out there so people can begin finding out about this creature that was so wrongfully made. It appears that you're well aware of Dogman and many of the other cryptids that exist. Well, I can tell you all more about the genetic experiments that began on hybrid creatures. These kinds of things have been going on for a very long time, so this is probably no surprise to you and the other people who are in that circle of knowledge. Things like this were fully field tested and were deemed to be ready, but something in the development stages went wrong. A specific breed of creatures that were part canine, part crocodilian. Some people on the team call them croc dogs, and I guess that is what they're called now. I don't know if there are many other sightings of these things because they're a relatively new development, but it is what it is. These creatures were designed to be super soldiers, to be used in upcoming and future wars. They were constructed and pulled from the DNA of Nile crocodiles and multiple species of canines like German shepherds, retrievers, and huskies. We thought that if we could make a chimera-like creature, along with the many others, it would have all the best abilities of both. It would have the discipline of a canine and would be a perfect companion for troops. They could have them breach and clear whole buildings of dangerous enemies. At first, the thought was that it would have specific traits, scales, and thick skin, and a canine's discipline and duty. During the testing stages, there were great results in open combat simulations. They performed amazingly. Their handlers were able to train them just like they had trained any other disciplined animal. These were truly meant to be killing machines. But we did have to change some training scenarios. I don't know if you'd call them pups, but we'll refer to them as that, the younglings. Of course, they would hunt down a target and subdue them, and our testing coordinator was bitten, and it didn't end well. The ferocity of these creatures was unmatched. They were extremely dangerous and hostile. One of them, we actually had to pull down the power of their bite because it was too immensely powerful. Eventually, the project was discontinued when these things were getting older, and they became far too intelligent. possessing almost a human-like strategic intelligence, and they began attacking their handlers during other combat simulations. Some of them were trying to help, not all were a problem, but they became one. They had broken out and became too much to handle. Not long after things began to go south with the project, our coordinator was told by another unofficial branch of the government who oversaw the entire project to basically pull the plug. So many of our small branch of these creations were put down, so to speak. However, some made it out. I'm only writing this today because I found out one of them is in the wild, and I need to know that people need to be careful. I live in Georgia, just north of a testing facility that exists that many people probably don't know about. And I know a few of them are out roaming around again. These things aren't very old. And I want you to know that these kind of chimera creations exist all over the world. Some are getting out and some are purposefully being let out. I feel incredible guilt over having a part to play in the design and creation and being a part of this project. Listen, I understand that sending this to you probably comes off as a creepypasta because there are so many that claim to have a story like I do but are actually fictitious horror stories. Well, I'm here to tell you that this is my own horror story and that these things are actually going on. So it's really up to you. You can believe it or not, but I'm telling you what I was a part of and the creation that I helped make. I can't guarantee you how many of these things are actually out there. Just like Bigfoot or Dogman, there's an undisclosed number. But just like their cryptid counterparts, they are highly intelligent, very hostile and aggressive, and masters of hiding and camouflage, especially in their swampy environment. I'm not sure I should even be talking about this. It happened over 30 years ago now, but there hasn't been a day gone by that I haven't thought about it, or the people who tried to cover it up. Truth's going to come out sooner or later. I suppose now is as good a time as any. I was on a field research team of biologists and botanists. These were some of the brightest people I had ever met. I was part of the botany team. My specialization was alpine environments. We were working on what was meant to be a long-term study of climate change in northern Canada. For the study, we were sent to several remote locations in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Most of the locations we studied were unpopulated wilderness areas. Since this was a new project, we were there to get base records of the local flora and fauna. The study was originally going to last 20 years before it was called off. It was a pretty big thing for all of us at the time. We knew about the subtle effects of climate change, but it had never been studied quite like this. However, we were about to find something none of us expected. The areas were so remote that we had to be dropped off via bush plane. We would set up a base camp that's surrounded by portable electric bear fences and venture out each day to do our field work. We were at each location for a minimum of 2 weeks. The study had been going well until we reached the tundra. At first, we thought we had discovered a major archaeological find. We had stumbled upon a cache of stone tools and spearheads. Some of the tools even appeared to be made of ivory from mammoth tusks. We recorded everything we found and, of course, took bets on what the paleontologists would say when we brought everything back. That night, something tried to break through the bare fence surrounding our camp. It yelped when it hit the fence. At the time, I remember thinking what an odd sound it made. I couldn't think of any animal that made a sound like that. It was distinctly human. The electric bear fence seemed to do its job. Things were quiet for the rest of the night, and we went to work the next day like normal. We did check the perimeter of the camp for any tracks, but it was a grassy area and covered in lichens, so nothing could be seen. The creature came back the following night and tried again to break through the fence. This time, it knew the fence would shock it, so it was pacing around the edge, trying to find another way in. Several of us heard it walking around outside and decided we would go out there and see what exactly was going on. Now, I want to remind you that this was an uninhabited area. Not even the Inuit lived out here. There were no people. So it came as quite a shock to all of us when we all shined our flashlights outside and saw 3 human men standing on the other side of the bare fence. They covered their eyes from the light, but they didn't run. They just stood there. At first glance, they appeared to be human, but I wasn't so sure. They were all 3, a little shorter than average. They had barrel chests and prominent orbital bones with sunken eyes. The hair on their heads were various lengths. They had hair on the exposed skin, arms and legs, that was entirely too long and coarse for them to be modern humans. Their clothes appeared to be primitive leather. All 3 of them had shoes of some sort, but they just appeared to be leather coverings. If I didn't know better, I'd guess there was a population of Neanderthal that somehow survived and isolated themselves in the wild. They appeared to be intelligent, but I didn't ever hear them speak to each other or attempt to speak to us. I realized after a moment of standing there dumbstruck what they were after. I quickly gathered up all the things we took from their cache and handed it back to them over the fence. He hesitated before taking the bag from me. Despite being a good 6 inches shorter than me, his hands were nearly twice as big. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Naturally, we called out on the satellite phone to relay what we had seen. We were told to record the coordinated and pack up camp immediately and wait for further instructions. This was a huge find. Could these people actually be living Neanderthals? Imagine what we could learn from them. A plane was sent to pick us up. We all assumed that we would be going back out there as soon as they decided what to do, but that wasn't the case. The project was canceled, and we were all subsequently sent in for psychological evaluations. The evaluations weren't evaluations at all. I met with at least 8 different psychiatrists that all tried to convince me that I didn't see what I saw out there. It was the same with my coworkers. They had us all admitted to an asylum unless we rescinded our reports. I was diagnosed with hysteria and prescribed a cocktail of pills that did their best to give me memory loss. I finally gave in and told them what they wanted to hear, and after a few months they let me go. I don't know the reasoning behind it. I couldn't exactly ask, but with as fast as they got us out of there, I'm certain they knew those people were up there. They just didn't expect us to find them. Maybe the government has a deal with them to leave them alone, or they just don't want that information out there. The only thing I know for certain is that I saw what were very likely prehistoric humans living in the north of Canada, and for all I know, they are likely still up there. In the early 2010s, I was working as a research assistant at the University of Arizona. Having grown up in the concrete jungle of New York City, I'd always been fascinated by the vast desert landscapes and the unique wildlife that inhabited them. So I was thrilled to have the opportunity to study in Arizona. One weekend, my colleague Ben and I decided to take a break from our research work and explore the Sonoran Desert. We were particularly interested in observing the desert tortoises, a species native to the region. We decided to camp out in the desert, despite the scorching heat. We packed our gear, plenty of water and food supplies in a bear-proof cooler, as recommended by the local rangers. We set up our camp near a trail known for frequent tortoise sightings. We spent the day hiking and were lucky enough to spot a few tortoises. We also enjoyed the breathtaking views of the desert landscape, the cacti, and the clear blue sky. As night fell, we returned to our campsite and prepared a simple meal. Exhausted from the day's activities, I fell asleep soon after dinner. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a strange, high-pitched sound, and it sent chills down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just a desert fox or some other nocturnal creature, and eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning, we decided to explore a different trail that led to a small oasis. We spent the day there, enjoying the cool water. As the sun began to set, we started our journey back to the camp. As we approached our campsite, we noticed something odd. Our tent seemed to be fluttering more than it should be, and some of our things were in different places than we had left them. We rushed to the site and found our tent unzipped and some of our gear thrown around. The bear-proof cooler was empty, and there were large, unfamiliar footprints in the sand. We were puzzled and a bit scared. Our first instinct was that we had been robbed. We hadn't left any food out, and the footprints didn't resemble any animal we knew of. The footprints looked like they belonged to a large bird, but no bird could have possibly made such a mess. Suddenly, I heard the same high-pitched sound from the night before. It was coming from a nearby hill. We walked away from the hill to get a vantage point where we could look up it. When we did, we saw a creature that I can only describe as looking like a giant roadrunner. But it stood about 5 feet tall, which I felt was significantly larger than any roadrunner should be. Its body was muscular, almost humanoid in its structure, but covered in a layer, of course, mottled brown and white feathers that seemed to blend seamlessly into the desert landscape. Its legs were long and powerful, ending in sharp, talon-like claws that were dug into the sand, providing it with a firm grip on the ground. The legs were reminiscent of a bird of prey, designed for speed and strength. The creature's body tapered into a long, sleek tail, feathers fanning out at the end, providing balance and stability. The creature's head was small in comparison to its body, but it was no less intimidating. It had a pair of piercing yellow eyes that were sharply focused on its prey. Its beak was long, curved, and sharp, resembling a scimitar. But the most unsettling feature was the creature's wings. They were large and powerful, with a span that could easily have been 6 feet or more. The wings were folded at its sides, the feathers rustling softly with each movement the creature made. It was clear that these wings were designed for flight, adding another layer of mystery to this creature. Despite its fearsome appearance, there was a certain grace to the creature. Its movements were fluid and precise, each action calculated and purposeful. It was a creature of the wild, perfectly adapted to its environment, a true embodiment of the harsh and beautiful desert landscape. After the encounter, Ben and I were left in a state of shock. We had come face to face with a creature that seemed to defy all known wildlife classifications. We quickly packed up our scattered belongings, our hands shaking and hearts pounding with the adrenaline of the encounter. Once we were safely back in the city, we spent hours researching, trying to identify the creature we had seen. We pored over wildlife books and online resources, but found nothing that matched the description of the creature. It was as if we had stumbled upon a creature unknown to science. We reported our encounter to the local rangers the next day. We described the creature in detail, but were met with skeptical looks. It was clear they found our story hard to believe, but they promised to look into it. In the days that followed, we couldn't help but discuss our encounter with our colleagues at the university. Our story spread, and soon we were contacted by a local wildlife expert who was intrigued by our description of the creature. He suggested that we might have discovered a new species, or perhaps a known species that had undergone significant evolutionary changes. We were intrigued by that idea and investigated it together. Also, the experience brought us closer as colleagues. We had shared this unique experience that no one else could fully understand. It was a reminder of the mysteries that still exist in the world, waiting to be discovered. To this day, Ben and I still talk about the encounter. It has become a sort of legend in our circle, a story we tell to new members of our team,